Well, shalom, everybody. And I'd like to welcome you to this weekend seminar. And I'm doing a teaching on the subject of the Elijah ministry. And so we're doing this seminar in Penrith, England, and this is July 2025. And I did a session earlier today, and I'd like to first review what was covered in that session. But what I'd like to do in this teaching is share with you the different aspects of what is the Elijah ministry and message, and then speak regarding the details of the different things. And so to begin with, verses that a lot of people are familiar with regarding the end time Elijah ministry in message is Malachi in chapter 4 and verses 4 to 6. So I'm going to review a little bit what I covered in the first session. And so this says in Malachi 4:4, remember the Torah of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb for all Israel with the statutes and judgments. So the subject here is the Torah. And this is a call from the Elijah ministry in message in Malachi chapter 4, verse 5, to return to the Torah. Because it says in Malachi 4:5, behold, I send you Elijah the prophet. So what is the context by which it says, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet? He's being sent in the context of, remember the Torah of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb for all Israel with his statutes and judgments. So fundamentally, the Elijah message is to call Yah's people back to the Torah. And this is going to happen before the coming and the grateful, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So generically speaking, we're going to think of the coming and great and dreadful day of the Lord is those things that are going to be associated with the second coming of Yeshua. And so before Yeshua returns, Yah is going to send the Elijah ministry and message to call his people back to the Torah. So if that is the case, then is there anything going on in our world today that within the body of Messiah, there's a call to express your faith in Yeshua as the Messiah by following his Torah? And of course, we know the answer to that question is yes. And how is it labeled? What may be the name of this? Well, some call it the Messianic movement. Some call it the Hebrew roots movement. But it is people that's endeavoring to express their faith in Yeshua by following his Torah, with the emphasis on keeping the Sabbath, the festivals, and the dietary laws. So here the subject is the Torah, and the word Torah comes from the Hebrew word yarah, which means teaching or instruction. So the word Torah is just generic. It just means teaching. And so you have to be teaching about some particular thing. And so the breakdown of the teaching that the God of Israel gives to us is there's two major categories, and they're called statutes and judgments. And so those are not two words we use every day, but they are words that occur in our Bible. And so a statute is a decree by somebody in authority who makes the decree because of the authority that they have. So the Hebrew word for a statute is hok, and the plural is hokim. And judgments are the category of commandments regarding the proper way that you treat other people. And so that is summarized by love your neighbor as yourself. Because statutes are the category of commandments that are decrees by somebody in authority, if you respect the authority, you will follow the decree. If you reject the authority, you will not follow the decree. And so, that being the case, if you honor and respect the one that's giving the decree, the Bible mentions this way: if you love me, keep my commandments. And you're to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So the measurement by which you love the God of Israel is whether you're willing to keep his decrees. And why is that a measurement of love? It is because a hok is something that is not logical for everybody to follow. And so it's because it's not logical, it becomes a test, do it or not. And so keeping the Sabbath, the festivals, and the dietary laws is not logical to everybody. It's not even logical to everybody in the body of Messiah. So that is how and why it is. Meanwhile, you don't even need to be a believer in the God of Israel, given if you would go at somebody in the face. Don't do that. But, an unbeliever is not going to like that. Somebody of another religion is not going to like that. And so you don't have to be a believer in Yeshua as the Messiah in order to appreciate that people don't like when they're being hit in the face. They don't like when you steal from them. They don't like when you manipulate them, etc. And so commandments about how you treat other people. All people like to be treated with dignity and with respect. And so that is not dependent upon whether you believe in the God of Israel. So we can classify commandments regarding how you treat other people properly as being logical commandments. However, the commandments that are of the category of decrees, hokim, they are not logical to everybody. So Elijah is a ministry of restoration. So if we go to Matthew in chapter 17, in verse 10, Yeshua was asked a question by his disciples. Why is it taught that Elijah must come first? In other words, that the ministry of Elijah is going to precede the coming of the Messiah of Israel. Is that teaching correct? That's the question. So Yeshua affirmed that that is a correct teaching, and he answers it and says in Matthew 17:11, Elijah truly shall first come and restore all things. So fundamentally, the ministry of Elijah is a ministry of restoration. So what does restoration mean? It means something that was in its original state, then it's departed from being in its original state, and then it's being returned to its original state. So with that as a clue, as the meaning of the word, Um, are we able to understand, biblically speaking, what was the original way that the God of Israel said that he was to be worshiped? It was to keep his Torah, it was to keep his instructions. And even in the history of the nation of Israel, as recorded in what we call the Hebrew Scriptures, we have in their history that they departed from keeping the instruction of the God of Israel. They broke the commandments, they broke the covenant, and we're told as a result that the nation of Israel was exiled into the nations of the world. And so, given that we understand at the beginning of our Bible that a believer in the God of Israel is to keep his Torah, and that's what we've departed from. That's why in Malachi 4:4 it says, remember the Torah of Moses with all of its statutes and judgments. Behold, I send you then Elijah the prophet. And so Yeshua said that there's going to be an Elijah ministry in the future. Elijah will come and restore all things. But then he went on to say in verse 12 that Elijah has come already. And then in verse 13 it says, then the disciples understood that he spoke unto them of John the Baptist. So John the Baptist, or Yochanan the Immerser, we're told about a prophecy at his birth that he would have the ministry of the spirit of Elijah. And this is Luke in chapter 1 and verse 17. And prophesying about the birth of John from Luke chapter 1 verse 13, it says in verse 17, and he shall go before him in the spirit, in the power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children. And that is Malachi in chapter 4. And the disobedient, someone that's disobedient is somebody that's sinning. Somebody that's disobedient is not following the Torah, to the wisdom of the just. And we're told in Proverbs in chapter 28, Proverbs chapter 28 and verse 7. Whoever keeps the Torah is a wise son. So the ministry of Elijah is going to turn the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. And that is to those that are not following Torah, to those that are, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. And that's a reference to Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 3. And so if we believe that we are living at the time of the soon return of Yeshua at his second coming, it's not going to happen until we have the Elijah ministry and message that precedes it. And so, like I mentioned earlier, do we have evidence that that ministry is present today? And we do. We call it the Messianic movement, or the Hebraic roots movement. And within that movement is a call to follow the Torah. And then within the movement is an explanation and a teaching of Ezekiel chapter 37, where Ezekiel was told to take two sticks. One was for the house of Joseph, for Ephraim, the northern kingdom, and the other was for house of Judah, or the southern kingdom, and to bring them together. And there's going to be a uniting of northern kingdom, southern kingdom, and then the prophecy goes on to say that his people is going to be brought to the land of Israel from being exiled into the nations of the world. So the most fundamental element of the Elijah ministry and message is a call for Yah's people to return to the Torah in the way that he gave the commandments from Mount Sinai. And the reason for the need of this call is that in the end of days, God's people would be doing and committing the same sin as the children of Israel. And fundamentally, that sin would be the sin of mixture. So the Elijah ministry and message is to call people to return to the Torah and come out of mixing. So that goes clear back to the Garden of Eden, because in the Garden of Eden we have two trees. We have the tree of life and we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 18, Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 18, the Torah is called a tree of life. One of the two trees in the garden is the tree of life. So the tree of life represented following the Torah or being obedient to the commandments of the God of Israel. And in Revelation chapter 22, we have that what proceeds out of the New Jerusalem and what is around the throne is a river coming forth. And on the side of the river is the tree of life. And so this tree represents following the Torah. What's the other tree in the garden? The other tree in the garden is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So what's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It is mixing good and evil. So the fundamental commandment, the fundamental way in which the God of Israel presents how we're supposed to be obedient to him is we're supposed to follow his Torah and not mix. So with that in your thought process, that fundamentally the God of Israel is going to teach us from his commandments how we're not supposed to mix. The challenge that the children of Israel had was to do exactly that. The challenge was they mixed. And so we have a word named Babylon in our scriptures. And Babylon comes from the Hebrew word Babel, which comes from the Hebrew word Balal, which means to mix. And so the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is represented by Babylon, and Babylon means to mix. Of course, we know who the king of Babylon is, and that is Hasatan. So you follow the Torah and the ways of the God of Israel. You don't mix. And the one who is the king of mixing is Hasatan. And the purpose of the mixing is to confuse you, to deceive you. And so that is why mixing is so harmful. So then we gave an example, a couple examples in our session number 1, how that in the first example, that the northern kingdom, how they expressed their worship unto the God of Israel in the form of mixing. And so we looked at 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 32 and 33, where it says the northern kingdom feared the Lord. Verse 32 says they feared the Lord. Verse 33 says they feared the Lord. And in verse 32, after it says they feared the Lord, then we see the mixing. And it says he made unto themselves of the lowest of them priests of the high places, which sacrificed for them in the houses of the high places. So they're doing that while fearing the Lord, in order to amplify to you that the people in their hearts, they were expressing worship unto the God of Israel. It says in 2 Kings 17, verse 33, the next verse, they feared the Lord. But then it goes on to say they served their own gods. after the manner of the nations, which they carried away from there. So, just like you might do as a parent, when the Bible repeats something, it's to amplify it. And so it says in verse 32, the people feared the Lord. Verse 33, they feared the Lord. But the way that they're fearing the Lord is they're mixing, and they're bringing in the worship of the God of Israel in their own understanding, their own desires, their own ways, and putting him in their image. Then it goes on to say in verse 34, unto this day they do after the former manners. They fear not the Lord. And this is typical Hebrew. You know, they tell you they fear the Lord. They fear the Lord. In the next verse it says they don't fear the Lord. And it's to catch your attention because it's unusual. It's not the way you would normally speak or explain things. And Hebrew has communicated to us so that this would catch our attention regarding what's going on there. And it says they did not fear the Lord, neither do they after their statutes or after their ordinance or after the Torah and the commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. All right, so we made the application to believers in Yeshua as the Messiah that may go regularly to church. And those who do, I can make a general statement and say they believe in Yeshua. In their hearts, they love him. They desire to serve him, and they want to live their lives and be good people. And so, however, in trying to please the Lord in expressing their faith unto him, the Christian world today doesn't say, well, wait a second, I need to obey the Lord. I want to honor Yeshua. And so as a result, I need to keep the Sabbath. As a result, I need to keep the biblical festivals. So they have a fear of him, but it's not expressed that way. It's expressed other ways. And this is exactly what the northern kingdom did. They had a fear of the Lord, but it wasn't in the area of I need to keep his commandments as he told me to keep the commandments. And so then, given that we can see here that the northern kingdom feared the Lord, earlier in the chapter, in 2 Kings chapter 17, in verse 16, it says that they left all the commandments of the Lord their God and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove and worshiped all the hosts of heaven, and they served Baal. So I had an image in my mind for many years that when the Bible referred to Baal worship, it was worship of some other god and some other belief system, and it had nothing to do with the God of Israel. But now, as I look at and examine things a little bit closer, we can see that what the Bible is calling Baal worship, it's mixed worship of the God of Israel. And then this mixed worship is also the great sin of the golden calf in Exodus in chapter 32. So I had an image in my mind that once again, when the children of Israel built the golden calf, I had an image in my mind for many years that they were worshiping some god of Egypt or something. But if you actually read the text, it says in Exodus chapter 32, it says in verse 2, and Aaron said unto them, break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, of your sons, of your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graven tool. And he made a molten calf. He made the calf, and they said unto the calf, this is your God, or these be your gods that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And so they said, the God of Israel that brought him out of the land of Egypt was the molten calf. And then we have something that follows that is extremely prophetic and extremely important. And it's in Exodus chapter 32, verse 5. It says when Aaron saw it, now Aaron is the priest or the religious leader. When Aaron saw it, that is the calf, Aaron built an altar before it. Now, an altar is the way that you express worship. And so now they're expressing worship. And look what they say unto the golden calf. Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to Yahweh. So I want you to notice that they were worshiping the God of Israel when they built the golden calf. And specifically, in particular, the golden calf was the way in which they were keeping the festivals, the biblical festivals of the Lord. Tomorrow's a feast to the Lord. So it says here, and Aaron made a proclamation. And so Aaron is specifying that this is when we're going to keep the festival. Well, that word proclamation is the Strong's number 7121. It's the Hebrew word kara. If we go to the main chapter on the biblical festivals, Leviticus in chapter 23, Leviticus chapter 23, and we look at verse 2, and we look at verse 4, it says, speak to the children of Israel, saying them concerning the feasts of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim. That's the same word that Aaron did. He proclaimed the feast of Yahweh. And so this is what they said concerning the feast which you shall proclaim. Verse 4. These are the feast of Yahweh, even holy convocations, that you shall proclaim in their seasons. And so that which was instructed to be done to keep the biblical festivals is what Aaron is doing. So there's a big and major Torah principle, and that is biblical history is prophecy. So for so long, when I was reading things in the Hebrew scriptures, I only thought that I was reading about history, and then there was a few scattered prophecies about the Messiah somewhere. But I didn't understand that this is written in the context of communicating to me that what the children of Israel did historically was going to be repeated by their descendants. And that caused me to realize one day when I grasped the concept that which the northern kingdom did, which we just shared with you, and I reflected upon historical Christianity, that historical Christianity came to do the same thing, ultimately did the same thing. And so if we take what's told to us in Acts chapter 2, we have the day of Pentecost, and we're told there on the day of Pentecost, there were 3,000 Jews that got saved. And that after Yeshua was resurrected, the first believers in him, they were Jewish. And how did they express their faith? I want you to think about it. These first Jewish believers, there's no Roman Catholic Church. There's no Baptist church. There's no Pentecostal church. So in what way did they express themselves? And so in the first century, who were they? Because I've never heard anybody ask the question in the Christian church. I've never heard anybody ask the question in this movement, who were those 3,000 Jews that got saved? Because whoever they were, they became the roots, or they became the foundation of my present faith in Yeshua as the Messiah. Well, there was a strong expectation in the first century and even into the second century that Yeshua was going to come back in the generation that he left or the generation or two following. But ultimately, as time went on and he hadn't returned yet, that is when ultimately, as the faith in Yeshua was taken out of Israel, when it went into the Greco-Roman world, as there were non-Jews that became believers in Yeshua as the Messiah from the Greco-Roman world. And the leadership were non-Jewish leadership that came out of the Greco-Roman world. They began the process of adaptation of the belief system in Yeshua as the Messiah. So we're told in Exodus chapter 32, verse 1, that they built the golden calf whenever Moses delayed to come down from the mount. So Moses is a prophetic picture of the Messiah. So when Messiah delayed to return at his second coming, then the religious system, which Aaron represented, they built a golden calf system of worship. And it ultimately became in 321, when Constantine declared Christianity to be the state religion of Rome. It became primarily known as Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church. But as we know, on the Greek side of things, we had the Greek Orthodox Church, and they ultimately competed against each other. And by and large, Christianity ended up, for the most part, siding and doing things according to the way it was done by the Roman Catholic Church. So what happened in Exodus 32 regarding the building of the golden calf, particularly it was a mixture regarding the festivals. Okay, that's the golden calf. But another major sin in the Bible that doesn't get much attention, besides the sin of the golden calf, it is known as the sin of Jeroboam. And so how do we understand the sin of Jeroboam? In 1 Kings chapter 12 and verse 26, it says, Jeroboam said in his heart. Who is Jeroboam? Jeroboam is the first king of the northern kingdom. After the days of David and Solomon, the kingdom got split in the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, and Jeroboam was the first king of the northern kingdom. So Jeroboam says in his heart, notice he's reasoning, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If the people go to do the sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, that means if they go to Jerusalem, if they go to the temple, and what ultimately in the Torah are the people commanded to go to Jerusalem to do. They're ultimately commanded to go to Jerusalem, among other things, is to keep the festivals. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16 says, 3 times a year shall all your males go to the place that I will choose, which is Jerusalem, for Passover / unleavened bread, for Shabbatot, for the Feast of Tabernacles, the 3 major seasons. And so Jeroboam says, now, okay, if I go to Jerusalem and keep the feast there, then the heart of the people that I'm over, it might turn to Rehoboam, who was the first king of the southern kingdom, and they may no longer show allegiance to me. So therefore, the king had his advisors come together, and it says the king took counsel, and it says he made 2 calves of gold and said, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. The same words that we have in Exodus chapter 32. And so this here is to show you that what Jeroboam is doing is paralleling what happened in Exodus chapter 32. He's setting up a golden calf system of worship. And what is a principal element of it? It says He says you can't go to Jerusalem, so he set up an alternative places of worship, one in the north, which was Dan, and one in Bethel. And it says this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one even to Dan. And then it says he made priests of the house of the high places, and he made priests of the lowest of people, which were not of the sons of Levi. So here we have a substitute place instead of Jerusalem, Dan, and Bethel. And we have a substitute priesthood. We have a corrupt priesthood. So from the corrupt priesthood, we have the people not following the festivals properly. In verse 32, Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month, like to the feast that is in Judah. What's it referring to? It's referring to keeping the Feast of Tabernacles on the 7th month and the 15th day. The northern kingdom did the Feast of Tabernacles on the 8th month and the 15th day. And so there's mixture. In the centrality of the mixture is how the people kept the biblical festivals. So the message of Elijah then is to come out of that mixture. So if we go to 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 21, Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long will you be between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but Baal follow him. So if the Torah is true, follow the Torah exactly how the God of Israel told you to follow the Torah, and otherwise come out of mixed worship. That's in essence what it means. Okay, so then it goes on to say that in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 30, that Elijah said unto all the people, come near to me, and all the people came near to him. And the King James says, he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. So the word repaired in Hebrew is Rapha. And most of you heard the song or the reference to Jehovah Rapha, the God that heals. So literally in the Hebrew, it says he healed the altar. But we don't speak that way. We don't think of it that way, that you're healing an altar. And so it's translated as repaired. He repaired the altar. But what did he do? The altar was broken down. In other words, the altar represents your place of worship. Broken down is a reference to they had departed from the Torah. They had departed from the Torah, entered into mixed worship. And so now Elijah had to restore the altar. He had to call the people back into the true and the correct worship of the God of Israel. And so in establishing and making that altar, and the altar represents your worship system, and so in building that altar to restore the correct worship unto the God of Israel, he did it in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 31. He took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob. So in establishing the correct worship, it was a return, you might say, to the proper understanding of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so the first level of the Elijah ministry and message is a call for his people to return to the Torah. And the reason is they've been participating in mixed worship. And in particular, the mixed worship is centered around how they keep the biblical festivals. It was mixed worship of the festivals in the golden calf. And then when Jeroboam set up his system, and then we then have the second level of the ministry and the message of Elijah, which is related and associated with Elijah taking the 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob. So there is an Orthodox Jewish midrash to Leviticus chapter 26, verse 42. And I'm going to paraphrase the Midrash. Given the fact that the name Jacob is spelled the exact same way in the scriptures, except for 5 places it's not spelled the same way it occurs in the other places. The name Elijah or Eliyahu is spelled the exact same way in the scriptures, except for 5 places where you have an alternative spelling. So those 2 things are facts of your scriptures, if you would look it up, and you can read the Hebrew. So the rabbis made a midrash of that. And the midrash is that ultimately the calling of Elijah is to proclaim and announce the end of the exile to the house of Jacob. So a fundamental function of the Elijah ministry and message is to teach Yah's people about the coming of the Messiah in the context that Messiah is coming to end the exile of his people. And that being the case, I want you to think about that thought, because do you know where it is taught that King Messiah, he comes to end the exile of his people? It is only taught today in Orthodox Judaism. That is not a teaching of Christianity. And so for Christianity, the way they view their belief in Yeshua as the Messiah is their primary lens by which they look at him. Either I believe in him as the Messiah or I don't. And because that's the primary objective, is to believe in him as the Messiah, then that becomes the focus of how they see the second coming. And so they see the second coming as he's coming for those that believe he is the Messiah. And so I heard it often in church growing up that Yeshua is coming back for all believers in him. He's coming back for all the church. And so the debate was not if he was going to do that. The debate was when he came for all believers, and what is associated with that is the resurrection of the dead, commonly called the rapture. Is the rapture pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib? That became the argument, but it was based upon a common belief that he's returning for those that believe that he is the Messiah. However, the Orthodox Jewish understanding, and in this regard, I am quoting the Orthodox Jewish understanding because I believe it's biblical. And that is, it's their belief that that King Messiah is the one who comes and ends the exile of his people, and ultimately then fulfills the prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 37 in verses 15 to 24. So now what I'm doing, I gave you an understanding of the first level of the ministry and the message of Elijah. And now I'm going to the second level of the ministry and the message of Elijah, the second major function. And that second major function is to prepare Yah's people for the coming of King Messiah by helping them to understand that Messiah is coming to end the exile of his people. And so the prophets have much to say about the task of King Messiah to end the exile of his people. But the primary central prophecy regarding it is Ezekiel chapter 37 and beginning in verse 15. So I am going to begin reading there. We are in Ezekiel 37, verse 15. The word of Yah came unto me, saying, Son of man, take one stick. And actually in Hebrew, the word that's translated as stick is eitz, and eitz most commonly is translated as a tree. So because you don't normally grab a tree with your hand, it was translated as stick. Take one stick and write upon it for Judah, for the children of Israel, his companions. Now, Judah is a reference to the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom was known as the house of Judah. And there were three major tribes that are linked and associated with the house of Judah. And they are Judah, Benjamin, Levi. And then it says, then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. So Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, is the northern kingdom. And then he says, join them one to another into one stick, and they will become one in your hand. Now, so Ezekiel is doing a prophetic act because I don't know whether this is in your thought process or not, but the way things are fulfilled in the kingdom of Yah is they come from the spirit world into the physical world. And the declaration is made in the physical, the declaration is made in the spiritual world about what is going to be done in the physical world. And so that declaration in the spiritual world is a prophetic act. And the prophetic act establishes that something is going to be done in ultimately the physical world. So this is a prophetic act. Now, so it's a prophetic act telling about a prophecy that the Messiah is going to fulfill. But now I'm going to read to you next. There's a prophecy within the prophecy. So now I'm going to share with you the prophecy within the prophecy. It's Ezekiel 37, verse 18. When the children of your people shall speak unto you, saying, will you not show us what you mean by this? That's the prophecy about the prophecy. So the prophecy about the prophecy is that the people wouldn't understand the prophecy. And because the people wouldn't understand the prophecy is that the prophecy would have to be explained to them. And ultimately, the thing that would have to be explained to them was, or is, verse 19. Say to them, thus says the Almighty, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his fellows, and I will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they will become one in my hand. And the stick whereon you shall write shall be in your hand before their eyes. And say unto them, thus says Yahweh Elohiym, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they've been gone, and I will gather them on every side, and I will bring them into their own land, and I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. So the uniting of northern kingdom and southern kingdom from their exile is going to take place on the mountains of Israel. Jerusalem is a part of the mountains of Israel, but Judea and Samaria, which the Western world calls the West Bank, they are also a part of the mountains of Israel. Then it says, one king will be king over them all. They will no more be two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore. Verse 24, and David, my servant, which is a term for the Messiah, shall be king over them. They will have one shepherd and one king over them whenever he gathers them and brings them back to the land, whenever he unites them. So Yeshua is that good shepherd in John chapter 10. He's also, Revelation 19, verse 16, he's also the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Yeshua is both king and shepherd. So Yeshua is going to be recognized as king over his people, and he does the task of the shepherd by gathering his people from the nations who have been scattered and bring them back to the land. He's going to be recognized for who he is when he does this task. That's what the prophecies say. Because we can see that in Ezekiel chapter 37, when it says in verse 11, he says, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel, all 12 tribes. They say, our bones are dried, our hope is lost, and we are cut off from our parts. Northern kingdom is separated from southern kingdom. Prophesy and say in them, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves and bring you into the land of Israel. So what's called their graves? Their exile. And so they're going to come from their places of exile, which is likened to a grave, and they're going to be brought back to the land of Israel. So if you come up out of your grave, what are you doing? You're being resurrected from the dead. So the end of the exile is likened to a resurrection of the dead. Now look at verse 13. And you will know that I am Yahuah when I have opened your graves. And so you'll know that I am Yahweh when I've opened your graves. They've got to know that who's this referring to? It's referring, they've got to realize that Yeshua is the Messiah whenever he does this messianic kingly task. All right, so who do you know in traditional Christianity that goes to church regularly? Let's say they've been going to church for 20 years or more. How many people in the church are thinking and viewing and have the perspective that Yeshua is coming back at his second coming for the purpose of ending the exile of his people? It's not present. They don't have that perspective at all. And so how are they even going to come to the thought process that that could or might be so? That's the purpose of the ministry and the message of Elijah, to proclaim that message, because that is something that had been, that message of that the Messiah is going to do this is a message that was lost, and Elijah is going to restore the message. All right, and so this is a part of the work of the ministry and the message of Elijah. So if that's the case, and this movement, has there been voices that has been trying to teach the body of Messiah that there's a northern kingdom and there's a southern kingdom and they're going to be united, and that he's going to end the exile of his people, and that prophecy pertains to non-Jewish believers in Yeshua as the Messiah? Has that message been proclaimed? The answer is yes. And because it talks about northern kingdom and southern kingdom becoming one, one label for the teaching is the teaching of the two houses of Israel, because we're explaining how northern kingdom and southern kingdom is going to become one. And what people do not understand is how the house of Jacob in the Hebrew scriptures is related to the ministry of Messiah unto the house of Jacob. So if you understand that this is the task of the Messiah, so let's go to Jeremiah in chapter 31. Jeremiah chapter 31. And the gathering, uniting the 12 tribes of Israel and ending their exile is likened in the scriptures to a song, praise, dancing. So it says in Jeremiah 31 verse 7, for thus says the Lord, sing with gladness for Jacob and shout among the chief of the nations, publish ye, praise ye, and say, O Yahweh, save your people, the remnant of Israel. And then it goes on to say in verse 10, hear the word of Yahweh, all you nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, he that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd does his flock. The one that scattered Israel is the same gather Israel. And when he gathers Israel, he's going to gather Israel as a shepherd. Well, who is that shepherd? John chapter 10, verse 11 and verse 14, Yeshua said himself, I am the good shepherd. So it's the shepherd that's going to gather, but the shepherd that's going to gather is also the same one that scattered. Well, who's the one that scattered? It was the same one that gave the Torah to the nation of Israel on Mount Sinai. The one that gave the Torah is the one that scattered. And now we're told that the one that scattered is going to be the one that gathered. And if Yeshua is the good shepherd that gathered, then who's the one that gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai? It was Yeshua. And so it was Yeshua that entered into covenant with Moses. And in the covenant promise, he says, Deuteronomy 30, that even if you be scattered in the nations of the world, in the end of days, I'm going to bring you back, even though you've been scattered from one end of the earth to another. And so there's a lot of detail to this teaching. understanding how it relates and pertains to you, and how it's going to be done, and how is it that a prophecy that was under both northern kingdom, southern kingdom. Now, the southern kingdom is the house of Judah. The southern kingdom are the Jewish people. And so there's a lot of teaching and explaining to show how this prophecy that is also unto the northern kingdom, the house of Joseph, Ephraim, how is that related and connected to a non-Jewish believer in Yeshua as the Messiah? So that is something we haven't heard by and large. Most believers haven't. And so it takes what the prophecy says. It takes time to explain the prophecy. But this is a central function of the Elijah ministry and message before we have the coming of the Messiah. So the gathering, uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel, it is likened unto a marriage. So in Jeremiah chapter 33 and verse 11, it says, the voice of joy, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride. That's wedding talk. So what is associated with wedding talk or marriage? It says at the end of verse 11, I'm going to cause to return the captivity of the land as at the first, says Yahweh. And so what's associated with wedding talk is ending the exile of his people. So the gathering, uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel is likened unto a wedding. And this is something that King Messiah is to do. So with that background, let's go to Matthew chapter 24, because I'm talking now about the second main aspect of the Elijah ministry and message, which is to prepare Yah's people for the coming of the Messiah by explaining them that the Messiah is going to come and end the exile. So in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3, it says, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came on him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So first of all, often when we read and study this chapter, we don't pay attention to the question. So the question that the disciples ask is, let us know the sign of your coming. The sign. How many signs is that? It's one. The sign is one sign. They only asked for one sign. Okay. So how did he answer the question in the chapter? He actually gave them many signs of the sign. And so what is it that they would want to know? Now, the disciples aren't Catholic. They're not Baptist. They're not Pentecostal. You know, the Catholic Church, the Baptist Church, the Pentecostal Church didn't exist. These are people that were in the Jewish culture. So what is it that they would be looking forward for the Messiah to do? In the exile. So they're going to so fundamentally what they're asking him is, what's the sign that you're going to come and end the exile? Now, in all the teachings and the explanations of Bible prophecy teachers going over Matthew chapter 24, I've never heard them state that it's their understanding that Matthew 24 verse 3, that Messiah is asking, when are you going to come and end the exile? But if we go to Luke's version of this, and that is in Luke chapter 21, in Luke chapter 21, see, he's asked the question in verse 7, Master, when shall these things be? What's the sign of your coming? And then in verse 28, after he gives the details, then he says, Luke 21:28, and when these things begin to come to pass, look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. So if I would ask the Christian, what does that mean? Your redemption. What is your redemption? A Christian would give me an answer of, that is Yeshua coming back at his second coming, and given that I believe that he is the Messiah, he's coming back to take me as his dwelling bride, and I'm going to begin the process of getting my eternal reward. I mean, that's what I'm looking for him to do. So now he's going to do it. But you take the exact same word and ask an Orthodox Jew, what is the redemption? And he will be able to quickly tell you that the redemption is the task of the Messiah to end the exile. So Yeshua was asked, when are you going to end the exile? He gives you all these details. And then he says, then you'll see the sign of the coming of the Son of Man, coming in the clouds and in great glory. Okay, so biblical history's prophecy. So given that it was actually Yeshua who is going to be the one as the good shepherd that's going to gather the exiles of Israel, and he that gathers is the one that scattered, and the one that scattered gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai, and the one that gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai is the same one that made covenant with Abraham, which is the same one that brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, which is the same one that led them through the wilderness on the way to the promised land. So how were they led in the wilderness on the way to the promised land? They were led by the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. So what does the Torah tell us that the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night is called? So if we go to Exodus chapter 24, verses 15 to 17, it says, and Moses went up unto the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. And the glory of Yahweh abode upon Mount Sinai, and a cloud covered it 6 days. So the cloud covered the mount, and the glory abode upon Mount Sinai. So there's a parallel construct of the cloud and the glory. But then it says in verse 17, and the sight of the glory of Yahweh is like a devouring fire. So the cloud, the glory of Yahweh is the cloud and the fire, the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. So this then is actually Yeshua, who brought his people out of Egypt, gave him the Torah at Mount Sinai, and it's actually Yeshua that's leading his people from Egypt to the promised land. And when he's doing this, he's ending their captivity in Egypt. So that's a prophecy that the same entity is going to gather his people from the nations and end their worldwide captivity and bring them back to the land of Israel. So Paul understood that what we read that historically happened to the children of Israel when they were brought out of Egypt to go to the promised land as they were led by the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, Paul understood that was a prophecy to the last generation. In other words, the generation that would see the second coming of Yeshua. So he begins by stating this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And in verse 1, it says, moreover, brethren, I would not that you be ignorant how that all of our fathers were under the cloud. They all passed through the sea. They were all immersed into Moses in the cloud and the sea. What's he talking about? He's talking about the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. He's talking about them once they put the blood of the Lamb on the doorpost, that the Red Sea was divided and they came through the sea. So then he says, in verse 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, now all these things happened unto them for examples, for a type, for a shadow. But what happened to them was written for our admonition. It was written for our instruction. It was written for our learning. Look at this, of whom the ends of the ages are come. You see that? Ends of the ages or end of the world. That's the same phrase that Yeshua was asked in Matthew 24, verse 3. What's the sign of that? What's the sign of that? And now that which he is answering is something associated with the children of Israel coming out of Egypt, that was written for the people that he's now going to give the sign for that to happen. And so how did they come out of Egypt on their way to the promised land? How were they led in the wilderness? By the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And that is called the glory of Yahweh. And so how is he going to bring his people from the nations of the world back to the land of Israel? The same way, except for his people are not in one place. They're scattered all over the world. So one cloud by day and pillar of fire by night is not going to do it. There's going to have to be multiple cloud by days and pillar of fire by nights. So in Isaiah, in chapter 4 and verse 5, Isaiah 4:5, it says, Yahweh will create upon every dwelling place of Mount Zion and upon her assemblies, plural. He will create, future, upon every, that's more than one, every dwelling place of Mount Zion. So in this verse, Mount Zion is defined as every dwelling place. And upon every dwelling place and upon all her assemblies, plural, there will be a cloud and a smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night. In every assembly, there'll be a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. That's multiple cloud by days and pillar of fire by nights, which is called the glory of the Lord. So it says upon all the glory, and the King James says shall be a defense. But the Hebrew word that got translated as defense is huppah. And huppah is the Hebrew word describing a wedding canopy. So this ending the exile of his people is likened unto a wedding. Okay, so this is why in Matthew chapter 24, after Yeshua initially answers the question, because he then says in Matthew chapter 24, verse 30, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Now is going to appear the sign. And the sign is he's coming in the clouds with power and great glory. If you didn't know what I'm trying to share with you, the image in your mind is he's coming in the clouds in great glory. It's those clouds in the sky up there. And he's like overwhelming you because of the majesty of his light and his coming. It's overwhelming you. But then we have in Matthew chapter 24, verse 31, the King James says he will send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the earth to another. So when we read that word angels, we're going to think of the angelic class, that the angelic class is going to be rounding people up. But no, that word, if you take it back to the Hebrew, is going to be malach. It's going to be messenger. I'm going to send my messengers with the great sound of the trumpet, and they will gather together the elect from the four winds, from one end of the earth to another. Actually, what Yeshua is quoting here and referring to in Matthew 24:31, it's actually the 10th prayer of the Amidah. So 3 times a day, Orthodox Jews pray what's called the 18 benedictions, the standing prayer. The standing prayer is Amidah. So the 10th prayer of the Amidah is, sound the great shofar for our freedom and gather our elect from the four corners of the earth. Blessed are you, O Yah, who gathers the people from where they've been scattered. That last part I paraphrased. All right. So this is what Yeshua is stating here. It's the words of the 10th prayer of the Amidah. But in addition to that, Yeshua is doing a classic thing by which you were to prove your point. You're going to quote from the Torah, and you're going to follow it up and connect it to the prophets. So that he will send his messengers with the great sound of a trumpet. That is a reference to Isaiah chapter 27 and verse 13. That's a reference to Isaiah 27, verse 13. It says, it will come to pass in that day that the great trumpet will be blown. All right. So it says, he will send his messengers with the great sound of the trumpet, that a great trumpet will be blown. And now it's going to describe the ending of the exile. And they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria and the outcasts in the land of Egypt, and they will worship Yahweh in the holy mount at Jerusalem. That's the outcome. When are they worshiping Yahweh in the holy mount at Jerusalem? It's Isaiah 2, 2, and 3, when the nations are going up and to learn the Torah that's being proclaimed from Jerusalem. And it says in Zechariah 14:16 that all nations were required to go to Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So after the ending of the exile, then Messiah is going to teach the Torah, and all the nations are going to be required to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So that's what this last part of Isaiah 27, verse 13 is referring to. So there's the sounding of the great shofar to end the exiles. That's the first part of what Yeshua referred to in Matthew 24, verse 31. And then the last part, he was referring to the Torah. He was referring to Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verses 4 and 5, which says, if any be driven out from the outermost parts of heaven, from there will Yahweh your Elohiym gather you, and from there will he fetch you. And Yahweh your Elohiym will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you'll possess it, and he will do you good, and he will multiply you above your fathers. So if you be driven out to the outermost parts of heaven, he's going to gather you. And this is referring to when he brings you back, you're going to have it better than your fathers, better than Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What's that referring to? It's referring to the Messianic era. And so now Yeshua is now combining these verses from Deuteronomy 30 with what says in the prophets, Isaiah 27, verse 13, which is reiterated in the 10th prayer of the Amidah. And he's basically there in Matthew 24, 31. That verse is a verse about ending the exile of his people. And so since the end of the exile is likened to a wedding, what does Yeshua go on to say in Matthew chapter 25? He tells a parable about 10 virgins. That parable is directly related and associated with the question that God asked, which is, when are you going to end the exile? So this is a parable about the ending of the exile. So in the parable of the 10 virgins, it says that there were 10 virgins. All right. An unbeliever in the Bible is never called a virgin. Somebody whose sins have been forgiven, they're called virgins. Though your sins be as scarlet, they'll be white as snow. And why the number 10? Because in the Hebrew culture, in order to have a legal congregation, you got to have what's called a minyan. And a minyan is 10. So 10 virgins is the Hebraic way of saying the body of Messiah. So Yeshua is given a parable saying that when he ends the exile, this is going to be the situation in the body of Messiah. That there's going to be 5 wise and 5 foolish. Now, does that mean 50% are wise and 50% are foolish? No. Why does it say 5? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. 5 wise. Why what? Why wise? Because it says in Proverbs chapter 28, verse 7, whoever follows the Torah is a wise son. All right, so the wise are those that are following and know the Torah. Those that are wise. What is the ministry of Elijah supposed to do? In Luke chapter 1, verse 17, the ministry of Elijah is to turn the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. So we're told in Deuteronomy chapter 4, that if you keep the Torah, in verse 6, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 6, keep the Torah and do it, because following the Torah is your wisdom and your understanding. So following the Torah is called wisdom. And so there were 5 wise. They were following the Torah. There were 5 foolish. These are the people that weren't following the Torah. And the people that weren't following the Torah, they missed the wedding. What is the wedding? It's the role of the Messiah to end the exile and gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Yeshua is now telling a parable about who is going to be ready and prepared when he comes to end the exile of his people and who is not. But because and we look at this, of the history of the people that believe in Yeshua as a Messiah from Acts chapter 2, see, the Jews that first believed in Yeshua as the Messiah, this was part of their expectation, because we can see it in Acts chapter 1. So if we go to Acts chapter 1 and verse 6, it says that when they were come together, they asked of him, Master, are you going to restore again the kingdom of Israel? All right, so there's that word restore again. When did we originally have the kingdom of Israel? Apparently now, when Yeshua's ministry, they don't have the kingdom to Israel, but they're asking, when are we going to have the restored kingdom to Israel? So what was the original kingdom to Israel that they were referring to? They were referring to when King David ruled over all 12 tribes who were united from Jerusalem. What King David did in doing that is a prophetic picture of what the Messiah is going to do. The Messiah is going to rule over all 12 tribes from Jerusalem. Well, after the days of David and Solomon, the kingdom got split into northern kingdom and southern kingdom. When the kingdom got split into northern kingdom and southern kingdom, the phraseology that we find in Amos in chapter 9, Amos chapter 9, verse 11, we see that the tabernacle of David fell. And so we're going to go to Amos and chapter 9, verse 11. It says, in that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen. All right, so what encompasses restoring the fallen tabernacle of David? Because that's the context here in Amos chapter 9, verse 11. Well, it goes on to say in verse 14, that I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel, and they will build the waste cities and inhabit them. They will plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They will make gardens and eat the fruit, and I'm going to plant them in their land, and they will no more be pulled up out of their land that I've given them. The exile is going to end. There's never going to be another exile again. So this is the context of describing that I will raise up the tabernacle of David that fell. And so who is the one that's going to ultimately restore the fallen tabernacle of David and bring his people back to the land? Well, that's the task of King Messiah. So if that's the task of King Messiah, and that was a expectation and an understanding of what the task of King Messiah would do, and now we have Yeshua, he's resurrected from the dead, and we're told in Acts chapter 1 and verse 3, he's been resurrected for 40 days. And for 40 days, in his resurrected body, it says he's teaching and speaking concerning the things of the kingdom of God. Now, he's obviously talking about his return and talking about him coming to end the exile, because that's what the question's about. The question is, are you going to do it at this time? So they're looking at King Messiah. So this is what King Messiah is going to do. So he's teaching about it, and they said, okay, now, are you going to do it at this time? And so in order that they would not be discouraged, he did not here directly answer their question. But the answer really is answered back in the prophets. If Yeshua had awakened and opened up their eyes about what the prophets say, because I'll show you where it says exactly when the exile is going to end. And it's in Ezekiel in chapter 34. And Ezekiel chapter 34, and we are going to read verses 11 to 13. Ezekiel chapter 34, verses 11 to 13. It says, thus says Yahweh Elohiym, behold, I, even I, will both search my sheep and seek them out, as a shepherd seeks out his flock in the day that he is among his sheep that are scattered. So will I seek out my sheep, and I will deliver them out of all the places where they scattered. Now he's going to tell you exactly when he's going to do it. I'm going to do it in the cloudy and dark day. So what is the cloudy and dark day? It is an alternative term for the day of the Lord. Because among other things, the day of the Lord is called a day of darkness and gloominess. And so, and I'm going to, verse 13, I'm going to bring them out from the people and gather them from the countries. I'm going to bring them into their own land. And so the prophets do tell us when it's going to happen. However, that wasn't, it wasn't known and understood 2,000 years ago. The clarity of what this all meant wasn't open to the eyes of the people at the time. So they ask him, are you going to do it? And so in order to not discourage him, he says in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, he says, but you will receive power after the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses. Witnesses of what? That is an answer to a question. The question is, are you going to restore again the kingdom to Israel? You'll receive power to be my witnesses of the restoration of the kingdom to Israel. So what is the restoration of the kingdom of Israel? It's the role of King Messiah to end the exile of his people and gather, unite the 12 tribes of Israel and bring them back to their own land. And he says that you're going to partner with me in this because you're going to receive power and you'll be my witness that I'm going to do this. And you're going to be witnesses that I'm going to do this initially in Jerusalem, then in Judea, Samaria, and then to the other parts of the earth. So this is a part of the message that they were empowered to preach and teach. So they were doing it. And when they were doing it, the people got excited that Messiah is going to come, like in their generation, or if maybe not in their generation, the next generation. However, after that message was being preached here, and when did they receive the power? On the day of Pentecost. So once they were receiving this power from the day of Pentecost and proclaiming this message, as the message of Messiah went into the Greco-Roman world, there was a losing of the understanding of the message and the preaching of the message. And so the message had to be restored. So who's going to restore the message? Well, that's the job of the ministry of Elijah. So now I'm going to show you that Paul was preaching and proclaiming that message because he's before King Agrippa in Acts chapter 26. And so he says to King Agrippa in Acts chapter 26, verses 6 and 7, he says, and now I'm standing before you this day, King Agrippa, and I am being judged, and he was being judged by the Pharisees, amongst others. And I'm being judged for the hope. I'm being judged for the hope of the promise that God made of the promise, for the hope. You know what the Israeli national anthem is called? Hatikva. What does Hatikva mean? The hope. And what does the song say? Our hope of 2,000 years to end the exile. What does it say back in Ezekiel chapter 37? It says back in Ezekiel chapter 7, in verse 11, that our bones are dried. Our hope is lost as long as we're cut off from our parts. Our hope is lost as long as we're cut off from our parts. And so Paul is saying, I'm proclaiming the hope of Israel. Verse 7, under which promise our 12 tribes instantly serving God day and night. The promise that our 12 tribes hope to come. In other words, it hasn't happened yet. What is the hope? It's to end the exile. It's that we would no longer be living in exile, that we would have the Messianic era, that Messiah would be with us, we would be learning his Torah, there'd be peace on the earth, etc. And so there was an empowerment in Acts chapter 2 to proclaim the message. Paul was proclaiming the message here in Acts chapter 26. And then Paul is referring to it in Romans chapter 11, where he asked the question, regarding the Jewish people that didn't believe that Yeshua is the Messiah. In Romans chapter 11, verse 15, that if the casting away of them be the reconciliation of the world, what will be the receiving of them? What will be the situation when the Jewish people believe that Yeshua is the Messiah? And Paul answers the question: life from the dead. What's the life from the dead that he's referring to? He's referring to Ezekiel chapter 37, that the dry bones are going to come up out of the graves and be brought back to the land of Israel. So Paul is associated with King Messiah. So now this message is Paul's preaching it. Paul's talking about it when he's writing his letter to the Romans. But because it's not in our thought process, we can read our New Testament and we don't see any of this stuff. We don't see in Matthew 24 that Yeshua was asked about it. We don't see how he answered the question. We don't know that the parable of the 10 virgins is regarding it. We don't know, and we don't focus on the question in Acts chapter 1. But the New Testament tells us about these things. And then actually the details of how it's going to happen is the book of Revelation. And so in the book of Revelation, if we go to Revelation 7, and there's a question that gets asked in verses 13 and 14. It says, one of the elders answered and said, who are these in white robes and where'd they come from? He said, sir, they came out of great tribulation. So we're answering the question of who came out of great tribulation. And in answering the question, here's the description of them. Those that came out of great tribulation. In Revelation chapter 7, verses 16 and 17, it says, they will hunger no more, they will thirst no more, neither shall the sun light upon them, nor any heat. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne will feed them, and he will lead them into living fountains of water, and Yah will take away all tears from their eyes. That is the description of those that came out of great tribulation. That description of those that came out of great tribulation, i.e. Revelation chapter 7, verses 16 and 17, which I just read, that is a quote from Isaiah chapter 49 and verse 10. So if we go back to Isaiah chapter 49, you can see how it's a quote. Isaiah chapter 49 verse 10 says, they will not hunger nor thirst, neither shall the heat nor sun smite them. For he that has mercy upon them, who's called the Lamb in Revelation 7, he will lead them. The Lamb will lead them. And he's going to lead them by springs of water. Where's he leading them to? He's ending their exile, because in Isaiah chapter 49 verse 9, it says that you may say to the prisoners, well, who did we see is in prison? Well, let's see who's in prison. Isaiah chapter 42. Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 24. Who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? And it goes on to say in verse 22 that Jacob, he's in a prison house because he wouldn't follow the Torah. In verse 24, what's his prison house? His exile. So now in Isaiah 49:9, you're to say to the prisoners, the exiles, go forth. You're not going to be in exile anymore. And regarding the prisoners that are going forth, it says, they will not hunger nor thirst, neither shall the heat nor sun smite them. For he that has mercy upon them is going to be the Messiah. The Messiah has mercy on the exiles of Israel. He's going to lead them. He's going to lead them where? He's going to lead them back to the land of Israel and end their exile, and even by springs of water. So we go back to the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation in chapter 15, Revelation chapter 15 and verse 3, no, verses 2 and 3, Revelation chapter 15, verses 2 and 3, it says, I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that got the victory over the beast, over his mark, over his image, and over the number of his name. And they're standing on the sea of glass, and they have harps. And what are they doing with their harps? They sing the song of Moses, and they sing the song of the Lamb, saying, great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, thou King of saints. So what they're singing is they're singing the song of Moses. When did the children of Israel sing the song of Moses? After Pharaoh and his army were defeated, Exodus 15, they sang the song of Moses and they sang the song of the Lamb. And what is something about what they sang that is a part of a weekly Orthodox Jewish Sabbath service, even today? They will recite in Exodus in chapter 15 in verse 11. It's called Mika Mocha. Who is like you, O Yah, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Well, that's what they're singing in Revelation chapter 15, verse 3. They're singing, great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. And so they're actually giving praise to the Messiah for ending the exile of his people during the time of tribulation. And in Isaiah chapter 4, verse 5, says the Lord will create upon every dwelling place of Mount Zion. So Mount Zion is a term for when he ends the exile of his people. And in Revelation 14, verse 1, it says, I saw a lamb on Mount Zion and 144,000. So why are they on Mount Zion for? Well, it's a way of saying that the Lamb, the Messiah, is ending the exile of his people. And what they're doing in Revelation 14, verse 3, is they're singing a new song. And in verse 2, they're playing harps. They're singing a new song and they're playing harps. So if we go to Psalm 137, it says in verse 1, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down, we wept whenever we remembered Zion. So in Babylon, in captivity, you weep. And look what they do in verse 2. We hanged our harps on the willows. So in Babylon, you don't sing, because singing is a Hebraic expression for no more exile. So when you're in exile, you don't sing. And so what do you sing with? You sing with your harp. Well, your harp's hanging on the tree. What kind of a tree? The weeping willow tree. And verse 3, for there they that carried us away captive required of us a song. And they're mocking us and they're saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. And so our captors are mocking us. Hey, you're in captivity. Okay. Sing about not being in captivity because we got you in captivity. And the answer is Psalm 137, verse 4. How shall we sing Yah's song in a strange land? Notice the song of Zion is the Lord's song. And who's that? That's the Lamb. And so they're singing the song of Moses and they're singing a song of Lamb. But you can't sing that song in Babylon. You can't sing that song in mixture. You can't sing that song living in the nations of the world. So this particular teaching about Messiah coming, gathering, and uniting the 12 tribes of Israel, I've broken it down elsewhere and taught it as long as 8 hours. Okay, so I've only given you a very brief summary, a very brief overview, and it's not intended, if you've never heard it before, to grasp everything. It's just for you to get the basic principle that the second level of the ministry of Elijah is Elijah's ministry is to prepare Yah's people to make them aware that Messiah is coming to end the exile, because Elijah's got a ministry of restoration. And that message about the Messiah that got proclaimed from Acts chapter 1 into Acts chapter 2, it got lost. So much so that the people that believe in Yeshua as the Messiah today wouldn't even know what you're talking about. That certainly is not what they're expecting. And the only way they're going to hear the message, it's not going to be from the church pulpit. It's not going to be within your religious system. It is, as it were, a voice crying in the wilderness. And so this is the second element of the ministry and the message of Elijah, is to prepare Yah's people for the coming of King Messiah, that he's coming to end their exile, and that prophecy is unto them about them, and they're to be ready and prepared when he does and completes the task. Those who are ready and prepared are wise virgins. Those who are unprepared are foolish virgins. And it's only by returning to the Torah can you possibly even hear about the thought. So that's plenty for y'all to think about. And so I'm going to end the message here. And when we do our next session, then I'm going to go into the third level and aspect of the ministry in the message of Elijah, which is going to be associated with Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, a voice crying in the wilderness. So hopefully for those of you who are watching live, you'll be back and you will join us as we continue the seminar and as we continue these studies. Shalom and Yeshua. Amen.